All right, this is Algebra 1, Chapter 4.3, Perpendicular Lines. So what are perpendicular lines? So when two lines, they form right angles, okay, like this. So their slopes are going to be opposite and reciprocal. Okay, so if I say that M1 is 3/4, so how do we find M2? Okay, so here is how we're going to do the opposite and reciprocal. So if M1 is 3/4, the opposite of M1, so basically you're just going to put a negative sign right in front of the 3/4, that's the opposite. And now we're going to go through the process of reciprocal. You're just going to flip the fraction. So you leave the negative sign in front and you flip the fraction. So that's going to be 4/3. All right, so we're going to be working on some problems here. So first of all, you're going to have to identify the first line, the slope of the first line. So that's M1. So we know that from the previous lesson, you know that M1 is going to equal to 1/2. Okay, for number 3, your M1 is going to equal to 6. Okay, now let's find out the what M2s are. So M2, you have to go through opposite, which is going to be negative 1/2, and the reciprocal, which is going to be flipping the fraction. So it's going to be negative 2/1. So you can just write negative 2. All right, so that's going to be the two slopes that I want you guys to find. So for number 3, you go through opposite. That's going to be negative 6, and then reciprocal. So since negative 6 is not in a fraction form, so you can think of it as 6/1. So when you flip 6/1, M2 is going to equal to negative 1/6. Okay, so that's what we're looking for here. Let's go ahead and look at the next one. So these are the two special types of cases that I want you guys to understand. So first of all, we know that the slope, if I call this M1, the slope is going to be 0 for any horizontal lines. If number 8, you got a vertical line, that means the slope is going to be undefined. Okay, so let's look at the M2. So M2 could be any line that's perpendicular to the first line. Okay, so it's going to be a vertical angle, a vertical line. So M2 is going to be undefined. Okay, so for number 8, M2 is going to be any horizontal line that's perpendicular to this vertical line. So M2 for number 8 is going to be 0. All right, so what about this one? This is a typical question I want you guys to look for. So M1 is going to be, okay, so you go from start to end. So you always want to pick a point on the left-hand side to start and pick a point on the right-hand side to end. So in order to find out what M1 is, you can go right 1. So that's going to be positive. It's going to be a positive 1 on the bottom. And then down 1. So that's going to be negative 1 on top. So your M1 is going to be negative 1. Okay, so let's go ahead and find out what my M2 is. So negative 1 opposite is going to be positive 1. And then you know that 1 is just 1/1. So the reciprocal of positive 1/1 is still going to be positive 1. So it's just basically 1. Okay, so M2 is going to equal to 1. Okay, so how do you find out the two slopes? So let's look at the given equation. That's going to be the first equation. So that's going to be M1. So what we're going to do here is to isolate y. Okay, so you're going to be subtracting x on both sides. So you have y equals to negative x minus 2. So you know that this is going to be your slope. That's going to be your M1 equals to negative 1. Okay, so we use a different color later. So let's just go ahead and isolate number 15. isolate the y. So we're going to have to isolate 3y first. So subtracting 2x on both sides. So I got 3y equals to negative 2x minus 9. And I'm going to have to divide it by 3 on all three terms. So I get y now is isolated equals to negative 2/3 x minus 3. So that's going to be my M1 for number 15. So it's going to be negative 2/3. Okay, so now let's find out what the M2s are. So M2, think about the opposite of negative 1. It's going to be positive 1. The reciprocal of it is just going to be flipping 1/1, right? So it's just still going to be positive 1. You don't have to write positive, so just put 1. Okay, so for M2, for number 15, you're going to have to go through the opposite. Okay, opposite is going to be just put a negative sign in front of this negative 2/3 is going to be positive 2/3. And you're just going to flip it, okay, for the reciprocal. So it's going to be 3/2. Okay, that's it. Take care.